Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to a special online event today called Freeing Your Energy Body from Early Family Conditioning Using the 5 Character Types to Liberate Your Authentic Self. My name is Stephen Dinan. I'm the founder and CEO of the Shift Network, and I'm always intrigued to go deeper into areas that I don't know a lot about. And today is going to be a whole new horizon for me, and I suspect a lot of you, this is going to be new material as well. And it's particularly important that we explore this because it's this material, because this is the interface of a lot of basic psychology, energy work, and ultimately our spiritual liberation. And so it holds a promise of really freeing us up from a lot of patterning and understanding other people in a deeper way, which is both useful personally and professionally. So our featured teacher today is an amazing woman. Her name is Anodea Judith. She's the best-selling expert on the chakra system, and she's sold nearly 1 million books and DVDs over the years and built a top reputation as a practical philosopher, looking at how psychological and spiritual systems apply also to our cultural evolution as well. So she's got a lot of sophistication from the East and the West that are married in a very beautiful way. So thank you so much for joining us, Anodea.
Thank you, Stephen. It's great to be on the Shift Network again.
Great. Well, I know that it's interesting. We tend to have tended to focus on your work with chakras, and this work draws a little more heavily from your background in psychology. So maybe you can share a little bit about the 5 character types and why that work, around, especially on our bioenergetic types, is so vital for us to understand ourselves and ultimately others.
Well, everyone's talking about energy psychology these days, and there's a lot to that. But long ago, Wilhelm Reich and then his students, John Parakos and Alexander Lowen, developed bioenergetics, core energetics, and they were studying the process of moving energy through the body, dissolving the blocks that we put up against the energy and dissolving body armor. And as Reich was working with his clients, and he was one of the first psychologists to go into the body. It's where he differed from Freud and Jung, as he really looked at the body process. And as he went into his therapy with his clients, he noticed certain patterns of stuckness, of resistance, he called it, that were pretty easy to spot once he started categorizing these, that you could tell by the shape of someone's body, wounding at a certain period of life. And typically there were belief systems, fears, defense mechanisms, strategies that each of these types took. And by learning about these types, you have the option of undoing them. And I say going from what is a pattern into to presence, into essence. So we're getting out of pattern, learning to recognize when we get into pattern and saying, oh, I don't have to do that. I can recognize that. I'm going to go back to my essence. I'm going to get more present than being in these defense mechanisms.
Well, it's fascinating to start to begin to discuss this, and I know you're gonna go a lot deeper in your upcoming training called the Character Type Training, which we'll share a little bit towards the end of the hour. But I'd love for you to share maybe something from your own personal background, of an example, or even working with a client, of how this kind of a model and understanding helps to liberate, can really liberate people from something that has been a chronic lifetime pattern.
Well, I work with the body and I work with the charge or the life force in the body. And when I'm working with someone, I'm always referring their consciousness, their awareness, to where do you feel that charge in your body? And as people learn to recognize that, they can also feel, oh, I feel the charge and I feel where I'm blocking it. You know, maybe I feel it coming up into my heart and I feel my heart contracting. So as I work with someone to understand these patterns, there's certain bioenergetic exercises I can use to free the person. And for instance, one person that I worked with a long time ago, and she's actually worked for me for a long time since then, is what we would call in this system the schizoid character structure, which is really tall and thin. They're kind of drawn in to the core. And because of that contraction, the energy goes through them almost like white water, you know, where a river goes through a narrow channel and the water gets faster and more intense. So if you can learn to expand the body so they're not contracted, everything calms down, everything slows down. And a person has the feeling of, oh, I'm here on the earth. Sometimes I say that for the first time, or I'm really in my body now, or I have more room for myself. When I do this in front of a classroom as a demo, all the other students can just see the changes in the face and the presence of the eyes. A person just looks more real.
Hmm. Fascinating. Well, you called it the schizoid type, and I think part of where people might have a hesitation in going and understanding these systems is that some of the labels for them can feel very pathological in a way. But actually, I'd love for you to just share about what are the five character types and how do they relate to the ways that we work our energy, and maybe frame them not just from the kind of pathological side, but also what's the positive potential in each too.
Yes, because each one of the character types has a gift. And the good news is that when they learn to dissolve the defense patterns, they don't lose the gift. That gift is already developed. So, in these five types, they relate to five stages of childhood and getting wounded in any of these stages. So, the first type is called the schizoid, and a more positive um, name would be the creative, the spiritual one. This is a person who is not terribly embodied, but because of that, has a real connection to the spiritual world. They might channel other entities or have psychic visions or really be into meditation. You see a lot of them in yoga centers. They also can be very intelligent. They can go into, things like computer programming where you're working with a lot of abstract ideas, academia, research. And often they're very creative. They're artists and musicians. And so they're highly intelligent. And that is one of the gifts. They go up into their head. So their head is developed, their intellectual capacity is developed. And where their growth is learning to come down into the body. But because the spirit is big and the body is contracted, when they try to get into the body, it's almost like they don't fit. It's like a pair of jeans that's way too small. So by expanding the body, we can make room for the person to drop down in and be more present. And this is a wounding that occurs right as you're coming into your body at birth, the first few months of life. Do you get touched and held by your parents? Do you bond well with your parents? Do you feel safe? And if that goes well, you wouldn't have this pattern. But if something doesn't go well there, then you might develop the schizoid pattern and contract into your core. The next one is generally called the oral pattern. And you can also think of them as the giver, the lover. On the Enneagram, if you know that, it would be the 2, the caretaker. They're always giving their energy away and taking care of people. And they're wonderful people to be around. They make great therapists and teachers. And and parents, they love to be there for their children. They give a lot. And so that's their positive quality. They don't have a big need for boundaries. They're very open-hearted. Sure, bring everybody over for dinner is the kind of thing an oral would say. But the shadow side there is that they do give their energy away and they deplete themselves, that they don't have good boundaries and they can get overextended and overwhelmed. And in terms of life force, they don't have a lot of it in their body, mainly because they're giving it away. And the wounding comes from not getting enough as a child. For the schizoid, the wounding is, I'm not sure I have a right to be here. But for the oral, it's, I didn't get enough. It could be food, it could be attention, it could be holding, it could be guidance. Can be the neglected child, the child that has to, share life with too many brothers and sisters, and the mother doesn't have time. And so the oral structure needs to learn self-care, turning that energy back on the self, having better boundaries, finding their worth within themselves rather than their worth in what they give to people. But they won't lose that gift of being generous and kind and perceptive of other people. So that's the oral character structure. The next one up is wounding in what I would call the third chakra stage, which is when a child is developing their autonomy, their personal will. It's the me, mine, mine. I want to say no kind of stage that a child goes through that we know is often very difficult for parents. And how this stage goes has to do with whether a person gets the wounding that classically, and this is a more pathological name, is called the masochistic character structure. I find that's too pathological, and I call it the endurer character structure. And the reason being is this is the type that is very loyal, and they can endure. They can take on the hard job. They can show up every day for work. They're dependable. They're quiet. They don't ask too much. They're sort of like the person in the background that is just, sort of carrying the load and not complaining and not being too big or too loud and just sort of shuffling along. And, like I say, they're very reliable, they're very solid, they're very grounded, they know how to ground down into their body. The shadow here, or the tragedy, in some ways, each one has a tragedy, is that they're not very happy. And they don't feel very alive because, in order to endure whatever it was they had to endure in childhood, they had to numb themselves. And so in the body, they tend to thicken the body as if thickening the distance between the inside and the outside, like putting on another coat and another coat. And, you just have a thicker layer. And that slows down the movement of the life force. It numbs the sensations. And so this type is prone to kind of a melancholy or a depression, and not really realizing that they have options in life. So they kind of live life as a series of have tos. I have to do this. It's Monday. I have to do that. And they don't really recognize that they have choices. They just sort of put up with things. And that wounding is, around 18 months to 3 years. Then the next level of wounding is really in the heart chakra. And this is a child who perhaps had everything that he or she needed in the early stages. And then when they get the impulse control that you gain in third chakra, they use that impulse control to shape themselves in a way that they will be liked or loved or approved of or popular or, in the good graces of the parents. And, a certain amount of that is fine. We need to develop that. But this wound comes from very conditional love. And that conditional love, says, I don't love you for your real self. I love you when you perform. I love you when you do things right. I love you when you follow the rules. Oh, you're such a good boy. You're mommy's favorite. You do everything just the way I tell you. And so we call this the rigid. And actually the wounding here is about 3.5 to 5. The rigid, follows the rules. They're high charge. They're high energy. They're the ones that keep everything neat and clean, and they make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted and the forms are filled out, and they always look well, and they have, pretty good bodies. And their tragedy is they are out of touch with their authentic self. They don't feel like they have the right to have a shadow, to have any messy parts, to have feelings even. And so that rigidity masks the feelings. And then, of course, for the rigid, when they come into relationship, they relate from their persona, from their performance self, rather than their inner self. And they don't get the satisfaction of real intimacy. So they can, only go so far into relationship, and they go, well, I'm not getting what I want, but then they do the same strategy in the next relationship. And then the final one, which is actually a little bit younger wounding than the rigid, it would be the late stage of the third chakra, which is power. And this is a child who did get to have their will. They did get to have their power. And they got a sense of their separate self. And for whatever reason, they were betrayed in some way. It could be a child that was used by a parent. It shows up often in, not always, but often in sexual abuse or violence in the family. And this is a child that doesn't go to being meek and cooperative. They go more to being the rebel. They go more to, I'm going to be powerful and I'm going to lead and I'm going to take charge and nobody's going to tell me what to do. And they're actually very good leaders. They make great CEOs. They make great politicians sometimes. um, and I would say most politicians have a good dose of this that is classically called the psychopath. I call it the challenger defender. I think that we don't want to, there's a lot of people with this structure that are not what we would call a psychopath. They're not deceiving. But there is a
Yeah,
sense that this
most
type
people don't
hides.
take time to be called a psychopath, so I think it's good to have a little balance there.
Yeah, yeah. And I call it the challenger defender because they will defend the meek. You know, that you want to hire them as your lawyer. They'll defend and make sure you win the case. But when challenged, they get very defensive themselves and they can turn white hot anger against you. So, you know, if you get one for a lawyer that fights for your case, don't challenge him on the bill.
Interesting. Well, I think it's fascinating the way you've laid these all out, and also chronologically in relationship with the chakras. So so we sort of sequentially inhabit our chakras or fill them out in a way. And so there's like if there's a disruption at a certain developmental age, then we're going to kind of build that into our energy body. Maybe you could share just a little bit more about how that happens.
Well, children have different levels of skills at different ages. You know, when a child is a newborn infant, they don't have any skills. They don't have language. They don't have muscular coordination. The only defense they can do is to contract into themselves if they're scared or not getting what they need. Same even in the oral stage. There's not a lot a child can do. I mean, they do express their emotions and they cry and they hope they get picked up and comforted, but you know, there's still not a lot of skill. As the child's coming into their terrible twos, they're gaining words, language. They're gaining muscular ability. They start to be able to do things for themselves, like button their own shirt and put their shoes on, and they gain mastery with that. As they get older and they have a sense of themselves, they can actually defend themselves. And as they learn and grow, you know, that's when they start to follow the rules and they go to school and learn what's socially acceptable behavior. So a child can only respond from the level of skill that they've developed. So in the first two stages, they can't use words. So they use emotion or, like I say, a contraction. And what happens is the child is building his or her body during all these stages. And, you know, if you only have bricks and you have no boards, you're going to build your house out of bricks. So they build their house, being the body, out of whatever is available. So if they're contracted at the core from the get-go, that becomes normal. And they think that's just the way it is. If the oral doesn't get enough, they kind of collapse in their body and they're sort of undercharged, but they think that is normal and they build their body around that. The endurer has to hold in. And so for them, that's normal. And having a rather numb and thick body that doesn't have a lot of flexibility, they just think that's the way it is. And, you know, the other two structures usually have a pretty well developed body, but they have trouble in intimacy, trouble being vulnerable.
It's fascinating. How does this relate to your more recent work on charge? So, how are each of these different character types working with charge in a different way?
Yes, absolutely. So, in that work, I describe charge as the life force, and that when we have charge, we are taught how to handle it when we're growing up. We're told, you're too noisy, hold it all in, be still, shut up, I don't want to hear this, or you're too emotional, or you're too sensitive, or come on, show up, speak up, be bigger. So we get all these instructions about how to handle our charge, our life force. And each one of these structures has a pattern of what they do with their life force, a pattern of how they hold or don't hold charge. So the schizoid tends to fragment their charge because it's too much for their little contracted body. So they put it in all different categories. This is a person who might be working 3 or 4 different jobs and, you know, having different relationships at the same time and moving from here to there. It's like everything kind of scatters. The oral tends to hold on. They say, oh, I don't want to let go of you. Don't go away. Don't abandon me. They tend to hold on to the past. They tend to hold on to old relationships. and, kind of go towards sadness, not depression so much, but they cry very easily. And that's kind of their release. It's kind of like the young self is trying to get taken care of. The endurer holds in their charge, and they have a hard time letting themselves out. They have a hard time letting themselves go and be free. The challenger defender, they have a lot of charge, and they are able to direct their charge into, a task, into a team, into an idea. They're able to make things happen. They're able to whip something together because they have strong charge. The shadow side is they tend to overpower other people with their charge and can be very intimidating. And because of that, people don't want to be close to them and they feel all alone. And then the rigid, what they do with their charge is they carry it on the surface of the body. And that is sort of like, I'm more interested in how I look on the surface than how I feel inside. So therefore, everything in the surface is just right. They'll show up in a therapy room and, the purse matches the shoes and the hair is done just right and their bodies are just right. And they have a lot of energy, and that energy goes into keeping things in order, to keeping things clean, to following the rules. But that charge deep at the core, they have trouble surrendering to their own flow of feelings. So you want to free the charge.
Free the charge, exactly. And this connects to, I know that Reich was really instrumental in understanding body armor and how that actually prevents us from relating to others in a deeper way and actually experiencing our full life force moving through. So maybe talk a little bit how the character types then relate to body armor and ultimately being able to live in a joyful, free, energetic.
Well, living organisms, Alexander Lowen said this, can only function when there's a balance of charge and discharge. In other words, we take in energy, we put out energy. It's like we have to breathe in as much as we breathe out, or we become unbalanced. But when a child is not allowed to release their energy, which is emotions or noise or jumping around, children are pretty lively, then they have to bind it, and they bind it into the tissues of the body. And they can also bind it into thought processes, emotional loops. As adults, they can bind it into addictions of a substance or a process. And all of that is a kind of armor. But typically, it gets bound into the muscles and tissues of the body. So one form of body armor is excess weight. And a lot of people struggle with their weight. Well, that is the body, and actually the weight is stored charge that hasn't been released. And so a lot of people, they'll go on a diet and they'll stick to their diet and then they gain the weight back or they don't feel safe. It's because they haven't dissolved the body armor to really release what's underneath. And on an unconscious level, the body's really needing that. For other people, it's muscular tension, or it can be bound into a particular part of the body, giving somebody an ulcer or, a stiff neck or out of alignment neck. They have to go to the chiropractor all the time. It can be bound into any part, and then that part gets stuck. It's like too much is stored there and it's all locked up. And so we want to unlock the body armor and harvest that charge for our feeling of aliveness.
Beautiful. And love for you to just talk a little bit about identifying yourself as one of these different types, but also recognizing that we're not just one type too, that these are in some extent patterns in all of us, and that the more we understand them, we can understand ourselves and others.
Well, that's very true. And, every time I teach this, and I've been teaching this for like 20 years, people, as they learn, they go, oh, I think I'm this one. Oh, no, I think I'm this one. Oh, my God, I have all of them. I must be so messed up. And, as I was learning it, I felt the same thing. Oh, I have this. Oh, I have that. And we can recognize ourselves in any of these patterns, and we tend to have more than one. We have like a primary structure that we lead with. It's our basic strategy in life. And then if that strategy fails, we have a secondary structure underneath that we're compensating for. And, my answer to people that feel like they have a little bit of all of them is that actually that means you're pretty healthy. Because what we don't want is to be stuck in just one mode of relating. And so the less healthy people are only one character structure, and they, regardless of the situation, they do the same thing every time. So the dominator not only dominates in business, but they dominate in their personal relationships. And, the oral will do this no matter what's going on. And the schizoid lives in their head no matter what's going on. Even if they're in bed with someone, they're still in their head. So what we want to do is get someone out of their primary defense structure. And then some of the other ones start to show up, and then we unbind those. And again, it's moving from pattern to presence.
I love that. For some reason, I was remembering this whole story from Ram Dass about in all the years of therapy, he'd never gotten rid of one neurosis, but they went from being big monsters into little schmoes. And so it's, in a way, it's like we're not trying to get rid of these patterns, but we're actually just making peace with them and understanding them so that they become, beneficial to us in different ways.
Yeah. And we can recognize them in people we relate to. Our partners, our children, our coworkers, our friends. And when we can understand this, we can understand better what's going on in that type of person. And also we can learn what's the best way to communicate with this type. For instance, the schizoids, if I'm doing a bioenergetic exercise with them, they like to know first. So they want me to explain the theory and why I'm doing it and all that. So that's a good way to talk to a schizoid. When they understand, then they feel safe and they can participate. With the endurer, because they kind of feel invaded and manipulated by life, if you want them to do something like, hey, I'd really like to see this movie, instead of putting pressure on them, which just makes them resist and feel invaded, you just kind of park it next to them. You say, okay, well, by the way, this movie is in town, and if that has any interest, let me know later if you have any interest in seeing that sometime. And that way they feel like they have choice, because that's what they didn't feel like they had growing up. So we learn how to relate to each of these types, how to talk to them, how to understand their wounding underneath. For instance, a challenger defender, they can often be vilified by the people around them. Oh, he's so mean and he's so dominating. And what people don't realize is there was a betrayal somewhere in there, where on some unconscious level, this being said, so help me God, I'll do whatever it takes to never be taken advantage of like that again. And so when we have that, we can hold compassion for these people that sort of seem very strong and domineering.
It's fascinating. Maybe talk a little bit about how this might apply in a therapeutic or coaching context as well. So how might you reorient your strategies? Give an example of one of the ones that you didn't talk about yet, maybe oral.
Yeah. Well, each one, you need to have a strategy for how to work with them. And, I have a friend, Stephen Kessler, and he's actually one of the bonus, and he's written a book, The 5 Personality Patterns. So we talk about these patterns a lot. And we were joking once about how you would advertise therapeutically for the different ones. And, so, for the schizoid, you'd say, we'll help you figure it all out. Well, that's the wrong approach, because that's what they're already doing. What you really want to say is, we'll help you find your body. So when you recognize when you're with a schizoid, you want to get out of the intellect. You can explain things so they're safe, but you don't want to stay there. You want to bring it down into the body. For the
Well, it sounds like
oral,
two different things. One is how do you market to somebody, which is probably to appeal to their primary dominant type, but then what do they actually need is a different thing.
exactly. And this all came about because I saw an ad once that said, painful and expensive, but it works. And I went, that's going to get all the masochistic character structures. And then the oral really wants to be taken care of. So the wrong way to advertise, but the ones that would get the oral in your practice is, oh, we will take care of you, And what the oral really needs therapeutically is not to be indulged and not to be, treated like a child, but to be asked to stand on his or her own 2 feet, to take responsibility, to take the charge, to find their anger and their boundaries, and really claim themselves, to get in touch with their own core. If you're working with an endurer, and I just did a supervision session for someone yesterday who had an endurer client, and she's learning this material, and she said, "Oh, give him exercises, and he'll do them, and then he'll come in and say, 'Well, that didn't work. What else you got up your sleeve?'" And I said, "Well, that's classic endurer, because they have to resist even the therapist in order to have their autonomy." So there's certain ways you can work with that to get around that, because if you're invested as a therapist in them getting well, they'll have to resist your investment. And so, there's ways to get around that. For the rigid, we joke that the advertising would be, "We'll help you be more perfect." And often rigids come into therapy saying, "Oh, well, I've gained 20 pounds in the last 2 years and I want to take them off. That's why I'm here." Not, "I want to find out who I am," and so what we don't want to do is, indulge them in being more perfect. We want to help them find their deep, core, authentic self and become more real. And then we joke that the challenger defender is, "We'll help you become more powerful." But that is the challenger's trap, being powerful. They need to learn to be vulnerable.
Hmm. I love the way there's a very beautiful symmetry between what people think they need and what they actually need, because they're sort of like different directions on the same pattern.
Yeah, they're almost diametrically opposed. So the thing that we've developed to go to, it becomes our go-to, if you know what I mean. And then we don't develop other parts of ourselves. And that's part of recognizing, oh, when I do this, I'm in my pattern. And what other choices do I have? If I'm saying to myself, "Oh, I have to do this and I have to do that," and I'm feeling the heaviness and the drudgery, then I know I'm in my endurer pattern, and I can stop and say, "Okay, there's the endurer pattern. I have a choice here that I'm not recognizing. What are my options? Let me expand my options." Or even talk to a friend and say, "I feel trapped, like I have no choice. Can you help me see some options?" And then you have options, you can actually make a choice.
So it sounds like you can work both on the level of belief and kind of thought patterns. So there's a little bit of like, there's the ideas that get constellated around a character type, but then you can also work just from the more energetic perspective as well. So maybe give an example of how you might work with both directions, like both from the kind of belief and ideas and self-concept, but then also give practices that help to shift things energetically.
Well, each of the character structures is said to have a false belief. And for the schizoid, for example, it's "my mind is my body." That if I can figure it out, that's everything. The oral tends to say, "If I just had the right man in my life, if I just had the right woman in my life, if I just had the support I need, if I just had something I don't have, then everything would be okay." And of course, they'll find the right man and it turns out not to be, or, it doesn't do the trick. So that's the illusion the oral has. The endurer says, "I don't have a right to be me." And they actually believe they're trying to please you. They can be very passive aggressive. They're trying to please you, but really they're resisting. And so they have to kind of confront that belief that, "Oh, actually, I think I'm outwardly," I call it outward compliance and inner defiance. And it's like driving with the brakes on. So you need to bust that belief that you can't show up as yourself and that you have to resist everything. Um, the rigid thinks, "If I can just be more perfect, everyone will love me." And the challenger defender says, "If I can just be bigger and more powerful and amass more wealth and amass more this and that, then everything will be okay and I'll never get taken advantage of again." Um, so each one has a belief that becomes their strategy. And the strategy gets them deeper and deeper into the pattern rather than recognizing, "Oh, this strategy is actually a defense."
Fascinating. Well, there's so many different dimensions to this. So let's talk a little bit how it might play out in relationships. So understanding how, two primary patterns might dance with each other, and that how that could really help shift a relationship if you can recognize the pattern without and learn to see it in a complementary way.
Well, like astrology or Chinese astrology or, Enneagram or any of these personality types, there's some patterns that go together well in relationship, and there's some patterns that don't. Like, I would not put together a schizoid with a challenger defender because the schizoid gets overwhelmed by the big energy of the challenger. And the schizoid might not have enough embodied energy to really meet the challenger, so the challenger wouldn't be satisfied either. But believe it or not, the masochist endurer goes very well with the challenger because ultimately they can't be manipulated and they kind of put up with whatever it is and they don't get thrown off course so much. So they can hold their own, they're steady and dependable. Um, Two rigids together tend to reinforce each other's perfect. They'll have the perfect little home and the perfect little everything, and then they'll wonder what's missing. Uh, Orals will do well with almost anybody, but they have a special hook with a challenger where they're giving, challengers can be narcissistic sometimes. So the oral is giving everything away to the other person, and the narcissistic person says, great, come on, keep giving it to me. I'll take it. And so they tend to reinforce each other. But if an oral is with a challenger defender, it's a good growth opportunity to learn to stand up to someone, to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. And the challenger will actually respect that person more for it.
So in a way, it's part of what you're saying, like with the oral and the more narcissistic one is like it kind of feed certain patterns feed a kind of codependency because you're reinforcing the core belief and the core energy, and therefore probably more likely to get stuck in it. And so you kind of want to be aware of your own pattern so you don't get drawn into the complementary pattern easily, right? You want something that's actually going to help you grow out of it rather than fall deeper into it.
Yeah. So, if a challenger defender makes somebody mad and they get mad at them, the challenger defender is just going to really buckle down and dig in their heels. And then the more somebody gets mad, the more they dig in their heels and they get locked up and they don't go anywhere. You have to kind of come around sideways and, not challenge the challenger defender, but speak for yourself and your own needs. And they can actually respond to somebody's needs if they're not too narcissistic.
Let's share a little bit just about the like energetic practices. Like maybe go through all five and just say like real quickly, what's an energetic practice that would be most suitable for each to help to open and balance and disidentify from some of the harmful aspects of each type.
Well, the energetic practices have to do with moving energy through the body. So for the schizoid, it's widening their sense of space, taking up more space, getting a bigger body. So I have an exercise I call widening the tube. So they have more room, and then I teach them to ground, how to get your legs really connected with the earth and start to run energy through your legs and through your ground so you stay grounded. For the oral, it's finding a sense of their own core and pulling their energy back. So with the oral, I work on boundaries. I work on just exercises that charge the oral up. Breathing exercises, for example, will bring more charge into the body. There's various patterns of tapping you can do to bring more charge into the body. And then when the oral has a little more energy inside themselves, they have a little more sense of their own core and their own boundaries and their own needs. For the endurer, it's getting them to let go because they hold everything in. And it's almost like that is, you want to push them and make sure they burst, but that's not exactly what I do. But I have them make noise, push into my hands. If you're not with someone, you can actually do it. You can push into a doorway. You can stamp your feet. Endurers have to find their anger and their objection. So it's really finding that fiery energy and letting it out. And then for the other two, the rigid and the challenger, I work with softening. They already have a lot of energy, but it goes too much into body armor and, defense mechanisms, and to let down and get at what's underneath all of that. So with a rigid, I try to unarmor the heart. There's certain exercises you can do with another person. You can have a hand against your heart that you push your heart back against to start to free that. I can work with the breath. For the challenger, we work with what was the betrayal? Where was that? What if you could heal that? and somebody had really been there for you at that time of betrayal, who would it have been and what would they have done and what would that feel like? So I'm always referring the experience to the body and then recognizing the charge in the body and recognizing the patterns it takes. And like I say, freeing it up and bringing it back into the core, back into the unique pattern of the unique essence of the soul.
Great stuff. Well, I want to honor you for the way in which you've really mastered the intellectual and psychological dimensions of this, and also bridged it to other domains with bioenergetic practices, chakra work, and also working with belief systems as well. It's a very comprehensive approach, and I know people can get so much value from it. So that's what I want to spend a little time now talking about your upcoming training directly, where people can go deeper into this material. So first of all, we're very grateful that you're doing this. It's called the Character Type Training. This is the first time we've ever offered something on this subject, and it's liberating your body, energy, and mind from limiting childhood patterns. So as Anodea's been sharing, it's really about, we just intrinsically through development are going to tilt into these different directions, and a lot of it's very subconscious in the way we hold ourselves and run our energy and engage with people, our core belief systems. And so unlike, some other personality typing systems, these are really linked to our developmental patterns and our energetic patterns. And it's not something that you get from just studying the Enneagram or other systems. It's kind of something in a way more foundational. So the program, you can find all the details at charactertypetraining.com, charactertypetraining.com. And it's going to be a 7-week program to really give you the foundational understandings. This is something that's appropriate not only for professionals who work in different healing capacities, but also just people on a path of growth and development, and people who are interested in learning more and expanding and becoming more free in your own body and free in your relationships. So it's there's a lot of deep wisdom in here. And Anodea, I'd love for you to share in your own words what people will get out of the 7 weeks from you, and then take us on a tour of the modules.
Well, what they'll get is a set of tools to understand and unwrap themselves, to free themselves. There's a bonus of videos that are me doing bioenergetic exercises with people, and they can find somebody to do those with, or they can do some of them by themselves. They'll get an understanding of themselves, what the wounding is, how that creates these strategies, how to understand someone else. And we will spend, of the 7 weeks, the first week just understanding how character structure forms, what are the challenges of childhood, a few things about charge and the life force, and just, some real basics of how to work with this material. And then there will be the next 5 weeks, one class on each of the character structures where we go into it in depth, and students can ask questions and say, gee, I have a friend that does this, or I recognize myself in this, and here's what happens, and how do I deal with that? So we can do some problem solving, we can do some healing. So there will be 5 weeks, one on each structure. And then the last class will be kind of how to put it all together, how to recognize when you're more than one structure, how do the structures play out in relationship. When you recognize you're an endurer and you're with an oral, how does that play out? And again, a chance for people to ask questions from their own lives and their own healing path and their own struggles.
Great. Well, part of what I love about this program is that it does cross a lot of domains. I always find that learning that crosses from different systems really enhances. It's sort of like learning different languages, where it enhances our brain's ability to function. When you grow up with learning 2 language patterns, IQ goes up. And so in a way, your transformational IQ goes up because you're learning things that are coming deep out of psychology, coming deep out of the whole Reichian tradition, out of chakras, belief systems. So you're really fusing a lot of different methodologies here into one really illuminating set of tools to understand these core patterns. So as we said, this is totally appropriate for people just on a personal path, as well as very useful in professional settings, from psychotherapy to coaching to consulting to relationship work, anything that's really engaged in helping people in their self-awareness or leadership or healing or teaching. This is going to be very helpful because you understand the deeper patterns of how people operate And when you can step out of your own shoes, it helps you be able to step into somebody else's and communicate with them more effectively, as Anodea was saying. And it also might even have marketing benefits too, because you can speak into somebody's core motivation more authentically than if you are just sharing words and perspectives for your own, from your own type. So it's, I'll share a little bit more about it. So again, you can find all the details at charactertypetraining.com. That's charactertypetraining.com. And it's going to be running for 7 weeks on Tuesdays at 5 Pacific time. You get not only the 90-minute class sessions with Anodea, and I want to note here that they are in video. So we have been gradually migrating to more video classes. Particularly with Anodea's work, we feel like it's so valuable because she can demonstrate different bioenergetic practices more effectively, really enhances the learning. She's also just such a warm, wonderful personality. You get more of that through video. So you get not only the live time with video, with Anodea on video, but you also get a chance to ask questions, really address any issues you might have. You get recordings of every session, video recordings, as well as audio recordings and transcripts. So you can use those in whatever context you have, whether it's traveling to work and listening on the car radio, or wanting to read late at night, because it's just that's better how you better assimilate information. You also have some time in each week with small groups, and we have an online community, Facebook, that often is very, very engaged, and we attract a very sophisticated student into these programs, and so you learn a lot also from the other students that you're taking this program with. And as I said, you get PDF transcripts of it word for word. Courses are going to begin on October 31st and run on Tuesdays at 5 Pacific. Even if you can't make the live class, you can still get the full value, because you do get the recordings and videos and transcripts, and you can still participate in the various live forums with people. We've added some great extra bonuses. Anodea's dug deep into her library, as well as offering some new things. There's first of all, a dialogue between Anodea and Stephen Kessler called From Pattern to Presence. Anodea, want to share anything about that bonus?
Well, Stephen Kessler wrote the book, The 5 Personality Patterns. And so we have a little bit different ways of going about it, but we talk about it from an energetic perspective. And it's just kind of an encapsulation of really dialogues that we've had many times over the years. I advised him on his book as he was writing it. It's a wonderful book that I even recommend for the course as an option. And he's very knowledgeable, and you can get a good overview, and you can get, another person's perspective.
Nice. We also have a PowerPoint charge pictorial that Anodea has assembled on charge and how to relate to charge in your system and work with that. So that's a good value add, drawing from some of her other teaching work on charge. We also have a video teaching from Anodea. She is really the world leading expert on the chakras, and so applying bioenergetic insights to how you work with the chakras, and really having practices to help develop or balance different ones as well. And finally, I should mention, we also have a bonus that's available only today. This is our special launch gift to you when you sign up today. So you can again find the details at charactertypetraining.com. This gives you an extra incentive to go over there, check everything out, read through the page, read through the testimonials, tune in, and if you're getting a yes and you're eager to learn this material and all of the practical benefits, then you've got an extra incentive to do so. It's called the 7 Keys to Transformation. This is a PowerPoint presentation with recorded audio, so it's like getting a full class on the 7 keys to transformation. And Anodea, want to share a little about that?
Well, this is, for someone that isn't familiar with chakras, the 7 Keys to Transformation PowerPoint is a really good way to get a basic understanding. And if you're a person that teaches about the chakras, you may find some languaging or some concepts that you can bring into your teaching. So whether you're familiar or new, it's a good expose to the chakras.
Great. Well, we've kept the investment very reasonable for this. So it's just 3 payments of $109, or you save about 10% when you pay in full at $297. So there's a lot of value. One of the things I love about Anodea's work is it's not just some inspiration, rah-rah for the moment. It's like it's new foundations that you can build on that really that you can use and apply in different areas of your life for years to come, which also helps because you've got the transcripts and recordings and everything available for that. So it's a lot of value for a relatively small investment, and we're very delighted to have this program. It's the first time it's been offered, and it's a very powerful foundation for understanding yourself and others. So again, you can find all the details at charactertypetraining.com, charactertypetraining.com. It's going to start on October 31st, run on Tuesdays at 5 Pacific. So, Anodea, we're nearing the end of our time. I want to first of all honor you for the wisdom you're sharing here. You have a way of making very complex things very accessible and very practical, and I really honor you for that. Anything that you're still on your heart and mind that you want to share with folks who are thinking about joining you for the character type training?
Well, I just love what happens when people learn about this. It's almost like they can't get enough of it. And they come back to me years later and say, I understood everybody in my life so much better from this. And I'm not doing that pattern anymore. And I have more intimacy or joy or whatever it is that was lacking. And I just love to see people open up. That's my reward in my teaching. It's like going out in the garden and seeing what flower bloomed today and watching people just kind of have the light bulb go on about, oh, this is why I always do this. And this is why it was so hard to get out of. And now I have a tool. Now I have a language for it. And so I think it empowers people.
Nice. Well, we know that you empower people all over the world. So we've been delighted by the work you've been offered through the Shift Network. And we always get rave reviews. So I know this is going to be a powerful program. So thank you, Anodea, for all you've learned in your life and all you've shared with others. So this has been really illuminating today. Thank you all for joining, and look forward to seeing as many of you who are as called in the upcoming character type training, which again, you can get the extra bonus of the 7 keys to transformation when you sign up today over at charactertypetraining.com. So thanks all. Thanks, Anodea. Many blessings.
Thank you, Stephen. Namaste.
Bye.